Hi guys. In this video I would like to talk to you about the concept of psychologism. Okay, it's really important for both continental philosophy, for Edmund Husserl, and for analytic philosophy. We're talking about Gottlob Frege. Okay, so essentially, um, if you want to understand, phenomenology, if you want to understand, what the heck it is Husserl was talking about in his logical investigations, you have to understand what is psychologism, okay? And it's a pretty tricky concept, okay? It took me, a lot of thinking to finally understand what the heck it's talking about. So, psychologism essentially says that logic is a product of our human thinking. So whatever our brains do, okay, it's pretty complicated, all this kind of abstraction and all these neurons going back and forth, but essentially um, our thinking, like inside our brain, our laws of thought produce logic. Okay, that's what psychologism says. um, and a lot of great empiricist philosophers such as David Hume and John Stuart Mill, they were psychologists. Okay, their um, view on logic was psychologist. Okay, so and from the analytic side, from analytic philosophy, Gottlob Frege, one of the greatest analytic philosophers, major influence on both Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein. He really criticized, psychologism, so. And also from the continental side, Edmund Husserl wrote his, logical investigations as a refutation of psychologism too. So, it's a pretty important concept. So, and like I said, psychologism states that laws of logic derive from laws of human thinking. Okay, and it's kind of tricky. Like it perhaps doesn't really make sense to you. So I would like to give you an example which will clarify this concept for you. So I recently read Franz Brentano's Psychology from an Empirical Point of View. It's one of those really important books which today no one reads, like no one really cares about Brentano, but this book was really influential. 100 years ago Husserl read it, and by the way, Brentano, he had Husserl as a student, and he also had Sigmund Freud as one of his students. Kind of interesting how they produced really different philosophies, but um, Brentano, after the book, after the actual text, he has an appendix to his, to this text, and in the appendix, he says, "I have recently been accused of, being a psychologist by Husserl." And then he says, "Well, what is it actually, to be a psychologist?" And Brentano gives a really amazing analogy. Okay, so he says that psychologism states that we can imagine a life form, totally different from us. Like, and think about aliens. Okay, like think about, I don't know if you play games, Starcraft. Okay, think about the Protoss and the Zergs. Okay, so here is the here is a psychologistic question, as regards to Starcraft. So we are humans, Homo sapiens, we are Terrans, okay? And we ask, all these questions, sort of, logical questions, like the law of identity, the law of excluded middle, and we came up with our doctrines, like we have, a whole lot of sort of interesting logical, works. We have Russell, Aristotle, Frege, Wittgenstein, all these logicians. They came up with, they discovered a lot of logical laws. So now the question is, what about, Zergs and Protoss? Okay, would they have, if they asked, the same questions we asked, you know, the same logical questions, would they come up with similar answers, or would they not? And you see, psychologism says that they would not. Okay, like a different brain, like let's say Protoss, they have this kind of different brain made out of plasma, some other chemical substances. Their brains are so different that they would have had different logic. Like for instance, for us, humans, we have this uh, law that this logical law that a thing cannot both be and not be. But for Protoss, with their different brains, perhaps they would say that a thing can both be and not be. They would have had a different logic. For our human logic, it is a valid inference to say that, all men are mortal. John Smith is a man, therefore John Smith is a mortal. Okay, this totally makes sense for us. But, for Zergs, this would not be the case. They would say, that's not right. We disagree. So, see, that's what psychologism is all about. Like we, with our advanced human brains, we came up with logic. But for a different creature, with a different, cognitive capacity, with, different, mental faculties, logic would be different. So that's what psychologism is all about. And it has been refuted by Frege and Husserl. You know, so for them, it's not about what we think about our, kind of specific brain. Laws of logic exist out there in the world. So it's a form of Platonism, you can say. So Husserl and Frege are both, to some extent, Platonists. So they refute psychologism as a foundation for logic. So I hope this makes sense. So, once again, to recap, psychologism is a doctrine which, kind of makes logic contingent. Like it makes it an empirical fact, a product of our brains. And critics of psychologism, such as Edmund Husserl and Gottlob Frege, really criticized it. And, they said that laws of logic actually exist in the world, not just in our heads. So that's what it's all about. So, let me ask you guys a question. Do you think logic derives from our brain, or does logic exist out there in the world? And, based on your answer, you can see if you are a psychologist or if you're not.